Well, hello, world. Welcome to Comic Book News. I'm your old pal, Dan Shaheen. It's been a bit. I took a couple weeks off there, took a little family vacation, take care of some business, but we've got another great interview lined up with you today with another industry pro. This is a guy who I've been a fan of for a really long time. And, man, he's got a memory like a steel trap because he remembered us meeting and talking years ago, and me even ordering comics at my little comic shop years ago from him, some of his earliest work, self-published, as well as his earliest work, Whiteout. Who am I talking about? Steve Lieber. Eisner award-winning cartoonist Steve Lieber. He won the Eisner this year for Best Humor Comic, which is amazing because as I remember Steve, it was like kind of realistic, noir, gripping crime comics. So we're going to talk about like what's the connection between how do you go from writing like grisly black and white crime comics to like mainstream funny books. Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. Are you kidding me? My favorite comic book character. Well, he's in my triumvirate. Like the top comic book characters. I think it's Jimmy Olsen, Uncle Scrooge, and then maybe Buddy Bradley, right? Those are the three to me that make up like kind of, if you put those three together, that's who I am. So we're going to talk to Steve Lieber and find out who he is. But first, hey, if you're watching this thing, you know we do that thing called the $1 Million Mailbox. I got a few comics in that mailbox, including one from Dan Fraga and some other stuff from indie guys all over the place. Landon Huber. He's a new guy. He's trying to put out some humor comics too. We'll be looking at that soon, me and Larry Young. But if you want to see your comics in the $1 Million Mailbox, just send them. Please send them to me. To the $1 Million Mailbox, P.O. Box 1163, Arcata, California 95518. Beautiful Arcata, California, I forgot to say. Send them in. We'll put them on the $1 Million Comics Cam. We'll spread them out. Take a look at them. We don't have the $1 Million Comics Cam today because I don't have too many Steve Lieber comics. I have a couple issues of Jimmy Olsen flopping around here that I bought. I've been waiting to buy them like in a collected edition I can keep on the bookshelf. That's how I like my comics. I know enough about it to chat it up with Steve. Hey, before we go to Steve, please take a moment, consider hitting subscribe, right? If you're not subscribed to me, you can click that thing, you can click the bell, get notifications of when I've got new videos dropping, talking to new people all the time. $1 Million Mailbox, just go back and look through some of my videos. I talk to the heavyweights of the industry, as well as the up-and-comers and everybody in between. Retailers, distributors, publishers, and, of course, the creators. So, without further ado, let's go talk to our pal Steve Lieber. But wait, we can't do it here. We got to do it in a more appropriate venue. Right? Of course. To the Batcave. And let's bring in, without further ado, let's bring in our pal and yours, I hope, Steve Lieber. Hey, welcome to Comic Book News.
Thanks for having me.
You know what? I'm having my dumb audio problems again. I hope this works. You're hearing me okay, Steve?
You sound great.
Perfect. Me too. Oh, wait a minute. I got to just stop this. Great. Much better. Welcome, Steve. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, my gosh. Wait a minute. I'm having real problems here again.
What a whole new, refreshing
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, this is what I want. Oh my gosh, I apologize to the people out there. I've been having major audio problems lately, of differing kinds every week it seems. So I really apologize. I hope we got it together.
It wouldn't be video chat if there weren't audio problems.
Seriously, I'm supposed to be a pro though. I'm not. I'm really not. But you are, Steve. So, tell me. I remember your work. The first work I remember the name Steve Lieber was from a book called Whiteout. Um, Written by a guy named Greg Rucka. And now both of you guys are just industry standards. You've worked it for all kinds of different companies. Tell me, how did it all begin for you?
Well, it started for me in comics when I was about 7 years old. I was completely obsessed with them. I wound up going to the Joe Kubert School, studied comics there, and came out of there and just started picking up comics work as quickly as I could from as many different people as I could. I did Hawkman at DC Comics. I did War Comics at Dark Horse. I did a Western thing, and now, yeah, basically it's like Joe Kubert's entire career in miniature at the beginning of my career. I even did a caveman story. Whiteout came about around 1997. I had just moved to Portland, and Bob Schreck, who had brought me in at Dark Horse a few years before, reached out to me. He had a great new script from this person who'd never written comics before, Greg Rucka. Bob had just started a company called Oni Press. At the time, I think all they had put out was, I can't remember the name of it. It was a comic by Frank Miller and Simon Bisley. They did one issue and just kind of walked away from it.
I don't even remember what comic that was. I'm hard pressed to even remember
Big
that.
Boy, Bad Boy, something like that.
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
Maybe someone in the chat will remember.
Yeah.
But he came to me with this crime story, and I'd done a few crime sorts of things, and I liked it. I was really interested in that milieu, and interestingly, Bob didn't give me the comic strip at first. He gave me Greg's first novel, which was called I can't remember if it was Keeper or Finder. Those were his first two novels. And I read it and was like, oh man, I want to work with this guy. Really emotional and visual and visceral writer. And then I read the first.
That's pretty unusual, no? I mean, well, so to read a novel, it's great. You can say, wow, this guy's a great writer, but how do you know that he could write for comics?
And I didn't know that he could write for comics necessarily, but I knew that he could write, and there were scenes in that novel where I could read it, and I was breaking it down into comics in my head. He was writing for visual impact, which is a rare thing in novelists, because one of the strengths of novels is writing the internal stuff. It's writing all the stuff that you can't draw a picture of. But Greg, in writing this thriller, was writing visual moments, and I figured if you could do that in prose, you can definitely do that in comics. Then I got the script for the first issue of Whiteout, and it was the best comic script I'd ever read. It was his first comic script, and he knocked it out of the park.
They say show, don't tell, right? Even in prose novels, and that's a skill that's really hard for a lot of good writers. And I guess if you can get that, then you can really dig what comics are about. But was he a comics reader even?
Not a huge one, but yeah, he'd read. He hadn't read widely, but he'd read well. And more importantly, I can't analyze how he thinks or how he works, but from talking to him, from seeing what he does in various media, Greg's a guy who understands story. He's like a musician who understands music. Yeah. And you give him one instrument or another, he'll figure out what makes this instrument work and what makes it special, and what are the tools it offers you to work with, and then he'll do what he does. It's why guys who play the guitar can pick up the piano so quickly or something.
Yeah. That's like what a musician as opposed to a guitar player, I think, and a writer as opposed to a comic book writer, right? Somebody like a Marky Vanier, who's been on this show, who wants to just write, but realizes you have to write differently for the different media.
Yeah, enough of an analytical mind to look and say, okay, this medium offers a toolbox of these interesting tools, and this is what I can play with to get the effects that I need. Their mind isn't on the tools. Their mind is on the effects. Their mind is on what's the impact that the story is supposed to have, which is where your mind should be. Um, and
Okay.
and as a result, they can switch between media no problem.
So tell me, Kubert School. Let's talk about that for a second. Worth it?
Oh, for me, definitely. I can't ever speak to what it is now because I was there 1987 through 1990. A lot of the teachers I studied under aren't even alive anymore. But it was exactly what I needed. And exactly.
Who are some of those teachers? Who were some of your favorite teachers at the Kubert School?
Number one, of course, was Joe Kubert. Man, he was not just an amazing artist, a great teacher, a guy able to articulate exactly why it was he made every choice on every panel and every page.
I think he's the greatest cover artist in of that era.
Yeah.
Like, for sure, and the greatest, possibly the greatest all-around cartoonist of that era as well.
Definitely one of them. Yeah, for me, he's like the Johnny Cash of comics, where he does pretty much one thing, but he does it so well, and it's so universally appreciable that folks decades apart can still appreciate it and learn from it and like it.
Yeah, Enemy Ace. Are you a fan?
Oh yeah.
To me, that's the ultimate. When I think Joe Kubert, that's my all-time. If I could only read one Joe Kubert book, that might be it. It might be the great writing as well, and the synthesis that came together with that character. But to take a character that's, first of all, war comics. I hate war comics. That's like the only one that I really love.
So did, at least taking his word for it, so did Joe. He had no interest in war comics. It was just a job, and it was a job he did really, really well.
Well, that was far more than a war comic. It really was a psychological drama. That character, so unique. Having it be the German pilot be the hero of the story is not alone was mind-bending, but just such a wonderful character. And when I look at that work, that's what I remember from Whiteout from you. Was that suspense, that approach of design on the page and using a lot of negative space to high impact. Can you talk about like the challenges of working on a book? Like, sure, John Byrne can pull off a full issue during a snowstorm, right? But how do you maintain was it a 6-issue miniseries?
4 issues, like 115 pages, something like that total. But there were 2 series, so 200 some pages. I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Knowing what it is you need to communicate, and then reaching deep into the toolbox and finding every possible tool you can to communicate what that story needs. When you look at Enemy Ace compared to stuff Joe Kubert had done before that, the shapes of panels are really, really stretching, and the proportion of things within those panels are exploding and contracting, because he needed all those tools to get the feeling of these fragile airplanes moving through this giant sky and trying to blow each other up. With Whiteout, what I needed to communicate was the coldest place on Earth, the windiest place on Earth, the driest place on Earth, and the most desolate place on Earth. And
your background right now kind of reminds me a little bit of the White.
It's the most desolate Airbnb on Earth.
Before please continue. But what I want to do, if we can, is I want to try and slip into a different mode here and look at some visuals while you talk about them.
Sounds good. Whoa.
So let's pop into the virtual studio. Holy cow. And let's talk a little bit about, wait a minute, we don't need these lines here. Let's talk a little bit about Whiteout. Let's see if we can pull in some of your stuff here. Let's talk about Whiteout. and some of the let's see, here we go. Okay, you still hearing me okay, Steve?
That's just fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. Why don't you tell me a little bit here about keep talking about your approach on whiteout.
Well, I had to do a whole lot with texture. I was excited about that for two reasons. Number one, the story called for it. It's set in a place where constant winds are picking up tiny stinging pieces of snow and hitting you with it like 1,000 needles hitting you. There's vistas where you see nothing but the colors white and blue for for 360 degrees all around you. I was really glad that Undy Press let me do this comic in black and white, because I don't think it could have made it look as cold in color. I think that the actual blue skies would have warmed the picture up too much and made it look more inviting and less harsh. To draw that stuff, and this was all before the era of the digital toolbox. Everything on there is physical media. That's my hand lettering. I'm cutting out bootleg Zipatone that I had to make at a copy shop because small press page rates in those days weren't high enough for me to afford to buy actual Zipatone. And I was just throwing everything I could at the page. There's tons of white paint spattered on the page and stabbed with a brush, and me mashing white paint onto my thumb and smearing it right across the page. It was very painterly in a way. I remember finding lots and lots of paint in my cat's fur and feeling really guilty about that.
So I was looking for more whiteout covers. I thought I had one, and then I saw this one that I had grabbed, and then I realized you didn't draw this cover.
Oh, that's Miller there, yeah.
Tell us how this came about. How and how? What an honor is this, right? To
absolutely.
To be covered by Miller.
It happened because Bob Schreck was the editor of the comic, and Bob in those days was the Frank Whisperer. He could go to him and get that cover. I think Frank is the only person who could get cleavage visible through a parka.
And then, they tried. I'm not sure where this image came from. Was this
that was the publicity thing for the movie? They did that without Frank's permission, which I doubt he was very happy about.
Yeah.
Because we don't own the copyright to that image. That image is copyright Frank Miller. They didn't buy it when they bought the comic.
Wow, no kidding. Even Frank gets ripped off by Hollywood.
Yeah, huh? Welcome to show business. The movie was just a goofy, fascinating, bizarre experience. It was, I think, first optioned around 2000, and the movie didn't come out until 2009. Wolfgang Peterson had the rights for a while. Then Reese Witherspoon had the rights for a while, and finally, the people who made the movie, I can't remember his name. God, Joel, Lethal Weapon.
Schumacher?
No.
Silver.
Joel Silver, yeah. And I got to see how the sausage was made, and it made me uninclined to eat sausage.
Right, absolutely. So tell me more about that, because I mean, a lot of cartoonists out there, it seems like, especially guys first getting new guys creating graphic novels, writing and producing, that's their dream. They want to get picked up and they want to be making a Netflix series.
I'm glad they made the movie. They didn't make a very good movie, but they wrote a beautiful check, and I'll always respect them for that.
And it cleared, right?
It cleared. It bought me half a house. Yeah,
wow,
that aspect of it was very good, and more importantly, it got the book, Greg's and my work, brought back into a new edition. It got it translated into like 8, 9, 10 different languages. It got us invited to international comics arts festivals, I got to visit Spain and France and a bunch of other places that I wouldn't have because there was a movie attached to it. It's just that I shouldn't trash the movie or anything like that, because there's no way I can be a fair audience for it. Every moment that I was seeing it on the screen, I was thinking, well, is that how I would have? Is that how I did it in the comic? Is that how I would have framed that? And that's not a fair audience for a film. And everyone, I visited the sets along with Greg. Greg was actually a script doctor on the movie, although they didn't actually use a word he wrote, which is unfortunate.
That seems weird.
But I visited the set, and everybody there worked their ass off. They tried. Everyone was busting their ass. And if a movie doesn't work, it's not because someone tried to make a bad movie. It's because there's 900 moving pieces, and all it takes is for one piece to go this way instead of that way, and everything else doesn't work.
Is it a thing that it continues to earn for you as it plays in distribution and DVD and streaming?
Even if it had been successful, I don't think it would. I got my check back in 2007 or whenever that was, and that was the last of that. But the comic, 20 some years after I started drawing it, is still in print, still earning royalties.
So you would do it again? Would you sell the rights to your work again? And I'm assuming, did you have what kind of a contract, or like what kind of a rights stake? Was it a creator-owned book? How did Oni do that? Since they sort of brought you together.
Oni actually had no piece of it, which was rare. I don't think they do that anymore. But that was all.
Owned.
Yeah, that was all Greg and me. And I strongly recommend for anyone, if you can keep 50% of the rights instead of 25% of the rights, do that. If you can keep 50% of the rights instead of 50% of the rights, do that too.
But to their credit, I assume that pays off, because now you have a relationship with them. You would want to work with them again and create more work for them, or
with the right deal, absolutely. In fact, Oni is republishing Jeff Parker's and my comic Underground right now. I think it just shipped last week. Underground is a comic that Jeff Parker and I did back around 2009, 2010. It's another nature thriller for me. It's a genre that I like drawing a lot. And Jeff wrote a hell of a story, really dark and claustrophobic. And I had a blast drawing it. It didn't find its audience when it first came out, so it languished a bit. But Oni just brought out a beautiful new edition. I had the chance to go in and digitally tweak a few things that a few little mistakes that had bothered me when it first came out in 2009. Things that no one else will notice, but have been annoying me since the book first came out. And I'm hoping that this edition will find its audience.
Okay, so we can move on from Whiteout, because really Steve Lieber's about the comics. Who cares about that thing? He got his check, cha-ching. He's on to write more comics. Speaking of which, though, you reminded me of one that even I forgot about, that I was a supporter of for you. Tell us about Me and Edith Head. First of all, who's Edith Head?
Edith Head was the Hollywood costume designer, worked on hundreds of movies, brilliant costume designer, a great teller of story, a storyteller working in cloth is maybe the best way you could describe her. And she wrote a couple of wonderful books about how to dress for success and how to apply Hollywood costume theory to your own life. My wife had written a prose novel called Empress of the World. Got really good reviews, some very nice coverage, front page of USA Today and stuff like that. This is about 2000. And a young adult literature magazine liked her work, reached out to her and asked her if she wanted to write short stories for their magazine. And then when they found out that she was married to me, uh, they they asked her, "Would you be interested in writing some panel fiction?" And we had to figure out what panel fiction was, and it turned out to be comics. Who knew? Yeah, it's a whole new word for the medium. And so Sarah thought about that. She dabbled in comics before, but we hadn't actually finished anything. But she knew that one of the characters in her novel had a backstory that was worth exploring. So we decided to do that in comics form, and which made her one of the first prose novelists to also write about her own characters in comics after having written about them in prose. There were only like 2 or 3 people before her who had done that, like Lee Falk, the guy who wrote The Phantom, and 1 or 2 others. Now it's a lot more common, but this was really neat. She wrote a great story, and I talked about going into the toolbox. It called for me to go into the toolbox in a completely different way. Whiteout's about one tough police officer operating in Antarctica, and it's about soaring vistas and dangerous people and paranoia and suspense and environmental threat. And this is a story about a girl in high school facing her family falling apart at home and trying to solve problems in the class play. Really, really different set of problems. So it forced me to draw in a way I hadn't drawn before. It was being printed pretty small, and it's a young adult magazine that's this is meaningless to to your viewers, but call it digest size, I guess.
Sure.
So it's a much smaller palette and a much more intimate story. So I got to draw like a. There we go.
Wrong color notebook. Sorry.
yeah, that's about it. So I got to draw in a really different way and use panels in a different way than I had before.
Yeah.
And it got nominated for an Eisner. And it would, wow, holy cow! You just had that one ready.
I got Will always at the ready. Sorry I didn't bring out Frank when we talked about him too.
Wow.
So speaking of Will Eisner, just everybody knows the award named after him. You're a fan of him as a cartoonist. It seems to me like you must.
I learned a lot from him. I studied his textbook on how to make comics. I think it was
sequential art and illustration, I believe he called it. And it's one of those ones that you don't continue to hear as much about since the advent of Understanding Comics and a few other books. But I feel like he had a lot to say.
He really did. I think he's actually a better teacher by example than as a writer of textbooks, which might be one of the reasons why the textbook hasn't worked as well. But I feel like a young artist can learn a lot more by sitting down with 10 of his stories and looking at the choices he makes and how he solves problems on the page than they could by reading his examples. Some folks are magnificent practitioners. Some folks are great explainers, and some folks could do both. I feel like Eisner was more on the practitioner side than
I think you're right. Although I think if he had gone to the approach of maybe using comics to teach about comics,
I think so.
Did you ever see his work in PS Magazine, the military work?
And that's great visual instruction.
Amazing, amazing.
I sometimes do comics for advertising, just as a way to pay a few extra bills. And a thing that I always tell clients is that if you design a comics page right, it's easier to read it than not to read it. And that's what I get from those PS magazines. That the moment that page passes in front of your eyes, you start absorbing that information. And Will was brilliant at choosing, making good graphic design choices, not just drawing, but graphic design choices to drive that information straight into your brain.
And
Um,
especially in advertising, when it's even more difficult because, when you're writing a comic, people are, you know that people are at least literate enough in the language of comics to know
mhm,
how to read a comic.
yeah,
You can't assume that in a advertising mass media context. So it becomes even a more difficult, like,
not at all.
communication challenge, I think.
Yeah, and frankly, these days with all of my comics, I try to draw them as if the person has the last as if the last comic they read was the little piece of the little safety manual in the back of an airplane seat pocket. Um, yeah, as a young comics reader myself in the '80s, I really liked super complex comics pages. The early Howard Chaykin American Flag, Treasure Life
Uh-huh.
Thriller. Um, Folks where you needed actual skill to read it. Like it was like you would get the page of comics, and it was a piece of sheet music that you had to decode.
Yes.
That would then put this symphony of images in your head, and I love that. But I don't want to ask my readers to be that guy. Uh,
Yeah. I think Chris Ware maybe is a good
that's
example of that, right?
Where is absolutely an example of that. Yeah, his comics are sheet music. You have to know how to read them and put in the effort to decode them. Sometimes you have to read a page twice, once just to figure out what the ideal eye path is, and then a second time to hear the music of it in its entirety.
And it's rewarding when you do, right? In
Yeah,
that same way that it's rewarding to pay close attention to classical music or what have you.
yeah,
Um, but then there's the other type of cartoonist. There's like the Sergio Aragonés or whatever, where it is just as plain as possible in any language to any age level what is going on in that picture.
yeah.
And
Uh,
in his case, it's funny. So this is where I want to segue into Steve Lieber, hard-boiled Antarctic detective uh, illustrator and superhero guy as well. How do you make this transition into winning the Eisner Award for humor?
uh, I a few years ago, I got invited to draw a book at Marvel called Superior Foes of Spider-Man. It was
Yeah.
going to be about Spider-Man's B-list villains. Steve Wacker invited me to draw that, um, and it, it sounded like fun. I said yes, and as the pages started to come in little by little, I realized that there were funny moments in there that it, I'm still not sure if the book was originally supposed to be a comedy because I was getting only a few pages at a time. Um, but I just saw lots of places in there where I could be funny, where I could take a moment and I could either steer towards superhero or steer towards sitcom. Um, and I decided every time let's steer towards sitcom. There's 100 super guys out there who could do great superhero moments, but there wasn't a lot of funny. I had never, no one had ever asked me to be funny before. In 15 years of making comics at that point, I don't think anyone had ever said, "Steve, this is a funny moment. Let's make this a joke." Um, but I love funny, and I wanted to see more of it, so I just started steering more towards it. And as the writer Nick Spencer got pages from me, he started emphasizing the funny and steering more towards that. And by issue 2, we were doing a sitcom. It was a lot of people called it "It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia" with spandex, and that's as good a high concept pitch as I can imagine. Um,
So you said I just drew it more funny. I
yeah,
just drew it funny, right? What does that mean?
uh,
And what is the and I want to talk about a little bit because I'm a dork. What is the connection between like the suspense angle in crime comics and the sort of tension and release that you need in a suspense context, and how does it or does it relate to writing humor?
I 3 words you said there, I think, are the key to it: tension and release. Um, it's just doing it towards different aims. Um, Suspense is all about uh, building sympathy towards a character, and then making you fear what's going to happen to them, or what the implications of what's just happened are. Comedy is all about keeping you at a distance from sympathy for folks, and then making you laugh at the horrible possibility of what might happen to them, or at least this kind of comedy is. The book was about a bunch of very, very cheerful sociopaths. Everyone in the comic was completely irredeemable. There was just no decency about any of them. So we could have as many horrible things happen to them as we want, and people would just enjoy it.
And that's always fun, right?
It's a ton of fun. I talked about going back to the whole toolbox thing.
Yeah.
With drawing suspense comics, it pushed my art towards illustrative effects, doing dramatic things with lighting, and making really tactile environments so that you would feel every aspect of it and live in the space as much as possible. With comedy, I found that doing that sort of thing I very quickly learned while I was working on the pages that if I pushed the pages to their full illustrative potential, it killed the jokes. The jokes stopped being funny. The page stopped being about the impact of the moment. It started being about the physicality of the moment. I apologize here. The moment anyone starts talking about humor theory, it's like your stoner roommate in college just waving his hands and trying to explain things about stuff. But
if it bends, it's funny. If it breaks, it's not. Yeah. So I mean, what I wanted to is that we can break it down a little more basic than that. Like when you draw a picture, like what makes it funny? Is it simply like using the tools of exaggeration and because like you're using your same tools of composition and light and dark and all the normal tools, but you want to draw a picture of Batman and make it funny? How do you?
Well, it's usually finding one wrong or absurd thing and steering the eye towards that. Everything else about the picture
right here.
Yeah, that's a great example. Everything about the picture says this is a Frank Miller Dark Knight Batman moment, but there's Jimmy inside the bat armor peeking out terrified.
I love this image. This crap. When I just searched Steve Lieber, like and Google Images, this one came up and just like it got me. Who are your humor heroes in cartooning then? Like who do you look for to like who can really bring the funny?
Oh man. Number one, Jaime Hernandez, Love and Rockets.
Oh, of course, yeah.
He doesn't just do humor, he does everything well. He's maybe the best all-around cartoonist of his or any subsequent generation. World-class talent, and I learned a lot about how to make funny work in comics from him. Number two,
not to mention every other emotion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Number two, John Stanley, the guy who did Little Lulu.
Yeah.
Those comics are brilliant. You go. Most of them are drawn on the same 8-panel grid that Matt Fraction and David Aja used on Hawkeye. And they're absurd and they're hilarious and they read just as fresh right now as they did 70 years ago when they were drawn. And I learned a ton from him about how to make pacing work, how to lay back and not telegraph that a joke is coming, but keeping things intentionally bland until you throw that monkey wrench into the works that breaks up the moment and gets the laugh.
I'm trying to remember. Stanley did the Little Lulu comics or the Little Lulu strip.
The comics. I don't know who did the newspaper strip. I've never seen them reprinted. But yeah, he wrote them and I think drew them, and he also wrote some great comics. 13 going on 17. He did some fantastic horror comics. Some of the best horror comics I've ever seen. Rivals or beats anything EC did. Just a couple of issues.
Wow.
But yeah, he's a guy on the level of Barks or Kurtzman, but doesn't get nearly as much attention.
Wow, I'm gonna have to read more John Stanley. Yeah.
Dark Horse reprinted a ton of the Little Lulu stuff. You can get it.
Yeah,
all.
no, I sold hundreds of those Little Lulu reprint books in my comic store. I had a really big all ages section in my comic book shop, and I mean, tons and tons and tons of that stuff, and Usagi Yojimbo and Gru the Wanderer and anything else that we could find.
Yeah.
I find it's a real interesting new age in comics and what the publishers are looking for as well. You seem like one of those guys, Steve. You could be equally at home writing, I don't know, in some of the new formats outside of the traditional like pamphlet funny books.
Yeah, I just like telling stories, and anywhere there's a script worth drawing and a publisher who seems like good folks to work with, I'm happy to go there.
Okay.
With Jimmy, the influences I mentioned before are all in there. Also, Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder. There's no way to dodge just that maximalist approach to humor, where sometimes the right thing to do is just be Mel Brooks and throw 20 gags into the mix, knowing that one of them will hit, and it worked because it supported the overall POV of the strip, which is this incredibly ADHD perspective shifting vibe that Matt Fraction brought to the book. I can't imagine a better writer for Jimmy Olsen than Matt Fraction, and I'm happy to say that I think I was the right guy to draw it, because I could turn on a dime the same way Matt does.
Obviously, there was a big connection because another Eisner Award nomination followed up by a win, and you had some pretty stiff competition too in that humor category.
Yeah, and they were all, and everybody else in that slate was terrific. I was super pleased and proud to have gotten that, and what a treat it was to work with Matt Fraction. Holy cow! Yeah, guy's got a mind like nobody else in comics. I feel like we could get another 12 issues just out of stuff that Matt spitballed and texted me at 11 o'clock at night. Just ideas just keep flying out of him.
So it's one thing to do a humor comic, right? But it's another thing. What I'm curious, in today's superhero grim and gritty, action-driven market, how did this perform commercially?
I have no idea. DC doesn't send numbers to you as you go, and Frank, it's the kind of information that I want to know if I'm doing a creator-owned book, but on a company-owned book, I don't care. I don't want to know.
Not that it matters, obviously, critically acclaimed and well received and everything. I just wonder how it sells compared to, say, Superman. Like what? It's obviously going to sell a percentage of that, but what is that percentage? I wonder.
No clue. I mean, I know that historically Jimmy Olsen is never a top DC book. Jack Kirby famously asked for it because he wanted DC's lowest selling book at the time to take over, so he wouldn't be taking a job from anybody else.
And created Darkseid in those pages.
Exactly, yeah.
so I want to talk a couple more, maybe more contemporary, or guys that you would at least have been looking at in humor comics that I really am a fan of.
Sure.
Bob Burden, you a fan?
Oh yes. I think one of the best single pages of humor comics of the past 50 years is that Origin of Flaming Carrot page that used to run on the inside cover.
Oh yes. Trapped in the basement.
Yeah.
Right. The complete origin story.
Yeah. But my friend Douglas Wolk, the comics critic, has been working on a project for years for a book that just came out where he read all of the Marvels, by which I meant he read every in-continuity story in Marvel Comics in order, going back to timely 1940 days, and all the way to today, treating it like it was a single piece of writing, and looking for thematic through lines, kind of like a Bible as literature kind of thing. And I pointed out to him that's the origin of the Flaming Carrot right there. He sat down and read 5,000 comics in a sitting, and it made him simple.
Because not too many absurd comics as absurdly hilarious, yet grounded as that comic. That's the line that he would walk. Okay, how about Steve Purcell? Sam and Max?
I read Sam and Max when it came out in the 80s, and I haven't seen it since. I'm sure it's in there somewhere. But
yeah, I mean, it's just some of my all-time favorite like humor comics from that era. Especially, he's really an underrated guy as a cartoonist. I mean, as soon as those characters made the transition into like video games and stuff, comics took a back seat. But if you have a chance to look at those, it's really worth reading again. And how about Reed Fleming, World's Toughest Milkman?
That dear to my heart right there. Oh, I love that comic. And that's another one where he made really smart and interesting use of tools, with this graceful and gorgeous black and white cross hatching, to make everything look like it was a studio era Hollywood film, shot by a great cinematographer, but that it's about these absurd louts and weirdos, and he gets really, really good effects by juxtaposing these two completely unrelated approaches and putting them together.
Yeah, the surrealist edge and the like Swedish humor or what, I don't even know what to call it.
But my favorite of his things was the first one he did, the Heartbreak comics, where Reed Fleming is just a supporting character, but it's about Laszlo, the great Slavic lover. I must have read it 100 times. That is a great comic. Oh man.
Okay. All right, Steve. See, we're good people. This is the kind of stuff I could clearly, like, you to be able to have made the transition the way you did into the type of like comedy I see you putting on the page. It seems like you really absorbed those lessons and read a lot of those great guys.
I think about how stuff works all the time. It's funny these days. It's harder than it used to be for me to sit down and read a comic for pleasure, because I'm like a mechanic. I want to pull the hood up and get in there and start taking things apart, and it's not the right way to absorb a story. You should go into a story just as an audience and let it wash over you.
Yeah, I think you're right. So what's next, Steve? Are you now the funny guy? Are you now Steve Lieber, the guy who writes funny comics?
I think so. And if I have to be typecast in something, that's a great thing to be typecast as.
Totally.
But I just go project to project, and if it calls for me to be funny, I'll be funny. If it calls for suspense, I'm a suspense artist. But my current project is, I love this title, One Star Squadron, written by Mark Russell at DC Comics. Mark is another person who's really good at funny. Holy cow! His Flintstone stuff at
Oh yeah, I read that. That was good.
all the wonderful things he's doing at Ahoy, and that great Snagglepuss miniseries he did at DC. He's got a fantastic mind. He's fiercely political in a way I really admire, and he's got chops. He knows how to build funny. He knows how to tell a story. It's all there.
Talk about what you mean by fiercely political and why you like that.
He's looking hard at what's happening in the world and what's working and more importantly what's not working. And he's willing to talk about it. And
I think I want to talk to that guy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. He's a great interview. And he's smart, and he knows how to make a point and then how to lay back and just let the characters act out the point rather than having anybody make a speech to you or anything like that. And he understands the comics toolbox really well, which I'm always glad to see. With One Star Squadron, it's about a bunch of superheroes cast out into the gig economy. They're struggling in exactly the same way that lots of people that I know out there are struggling. I think when it came out, I said one of the things I like about this book is that it allows me to imagine what it'd be like to have my livelihood dependent upon giant corporations and their fickle customer base. Yeah, because I can't imagine what that would be like. Boy, with the main character, the central character in One Star Squadron is Red Tornado, who's this sincere person trying to work within a system to help people who are being crushed by that system. And it's harsh and it's sad and it's funny and there's fantastic moments in it. And I'm having a great time drawing it.
Great. I love some of those characters. I really appreciate DC's, willingness to lean into comedy over the years with some of their biggest properties and characters, like the Giffen DeMatteis Justice League era.
Oh, yeah.
Almost unbelievable that it happened and that it was as good as it was too.
Yep. And I should go back there and tip my hat to another important comedy influence, the great Kevin Maguire.
You have to, right?
Oh man, he's incredible. Oh, what a talent! And doubly impressive that he could do all the superhero riffs and all the funny stuff at the same time. It's a juggle.
For sure. For at the highest level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Cheesecake as well, and blend it seamlessly into what it is. That book is almost a miracle to me, some of the work that they did.
Absolutely.
I've got. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
I was saying, one of the advantages to doing this kind of work with DC is that they've got such a deep bench of characters that they can take risks. They can take risks with some of them and tell the sorts of stories that you can't tell if you're having to protect a piece of valuable intellectual property. That's it.
Yeah, who cares? Yeah, who cares what they do with Red Tornado or whatever, or some of the Suicide Squad characters, I guess, even that they put out.
Oh, exactly. That said, I mean, to their credit, DC let us do some incredible violence to the most valuable piece of intellectual property they have. What we did with Batman, I would not. I remember getting the script from Matt saying, "Oh, it's good that you wrote that, Matt. And it's hilarious, and there's no way in hell they're going to let us put this in a comic." And 4 months later, there it was on the stands. There's Bruce Wayne sitting on the toilet in Wayne Enterprises, reading the newspaper, overhearing his employees talking about him.
Well, Steve, I know you got to get out of here pretty soon, but we've got some questions from the people. We got a few minutes. Let me just go back to the beginning here on comments and see what's going on here. I'll look at old Grizzly Sheen. Yeah, you ain't seen nothing yet, guys. Plus, just to prove there's a fine line between like the dramatic and the comedic, like it's not that much that is needed to make it me ridiculous anyway.
You could take the beard to a full green arrow if you wanted there.
I might, I'm going for. I've always said, Steve, it's not a beard until you get hassled at airport security. So this is a beard, my friend. Okay, wait, they made a whiteout movie, right? I think we covered that in detail, plenty. But JW came in and said Bad Boy. He Googled it for us. That's the Frank Miller Bisley. I remember it, like a guy on the cover with like flexing or something like that. Let's see. Oh, any chance of a third final whiteout comic with Greg Rucka? We had whiteout. We had whiteout melt. And
we did 30 pages of it, and the story wasn't working for Greg, so we put it on the shelf. Someday I should put those 30 pages online just so people can see them.
That's got Kickstarter written all over it, pal.
It's unless Greg was to figure out what he really wants to do with the story, we wouldn't put it out for sale just for the heck of it. But I know people are curious, so I might make it available in DVD extra or something someday.
I think more of like an environmental global warming angle too on it.
That was the story, yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. See, he's a real blind spot for me aside from his Grendel story.
Wow, 1997.
With these few short moments, he's become a guy I want to watch. Ben does a Matt Wagner Grendel podcast, talks to Matt Wagner all the time. Cool. I'm ashamed to admit I didn't even remember that.
That was the last thing I did right before Whiteout.
Awesome. Fantastic. Let's see. Underground book that just came out looks interesting. Jeff Parker, what do you know?
Yeah. You should read that sometime, Jeff. You take a look at it.
Apex Comics just says, hey, Steve.
Hey, Apex.
And, also brings in another great. How about one we forgot? Jack Cole for sure, right? Like,
what a mind, yeah. And another person who reached deep into the toolbox to find things that he could do with comics that you couldn't do anywhere else. And those comics still read great today.
Oh my gosh! And I almost forgot. I would have been remiss to mention. Man, do you know I'm from Pittsburgh?
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I'm from Pittsburgh, and so's Heroinburg. Here, frequent watcher and commenter on the show. Hail to chat. I went to Allardyce High School and also Kappa in Pittsburgh at the same time as Steve Lieber, and graduated a year later than you guys might have known each other.
Okay, very cool. Yep, class of '85 right here.
Kirby's Jimmy Olsen was fantastic. I guess I agree. Like, I liked him, but I just liked any issue of Jimmy Olsen. Like, dude, he's the biggest jerk in comics, right? Like, every issue he's like scheming, like how he's stealing Superman's powers, or he's just doing something so self-centered.
One of the things that I love about how Matt thought about the character is what kind of person could go through this, could be involved in this many weird things and remain essentially unchanged by it all. Thank you, Herenberg. You make me wish I had never update the thing.
Steve, you got to update it. I was going to bring it up, but you had all that time in the pandemic. You couldn't update your website. Come on.
It's tragic. I think it's announcing a convention appearance in 2017 at this point.
And Herenberg is also my plug meister. He's always remembering to plug the stuff that I didn't. So go check out Steve's Twitter.
Right there. That's where you can find me up to the moment. Just talking about everything and anything on Earth.
Oh, and he's got some piercing questions here. Are you ready? So ask Steve about negative royalty units. Lots of current creators who aren't getting what they should from the big two.
No scandal or anything there. DC had some kind of bookkeeping error that either they're going to resolve or that the negative royalty units were resolving. Essentially, a royalty statement went out where a lot of digital back issues were were coming in with being charged against current royalties, and it's not Hollywood accounting or anything like that. It's just somewhere along the line there was a spreadsheet error or some kind of mistake. I'm not worried about it at all.
Okay. And what do you know? You follow the industry news and all the changes about DC changing distribution and switching up and all that stuff? Do you follow that?
Some of it. I try to pay close attention to stuff where I could conceivably make choices based on it. Some things I've are so far beyond my pay grade that there's no point even putting a lot of brain work into it. Other stuff I paid really close attention to. I'm seeing the note.
To be honest, you shouldn't have to care. Neither should like the fan of comics or whatever. I care because I'm a big dork, but here's more what we care about. And we talked about Russell and Lieber's One Star Squadron looks a lot like the Giffen de Matteis 90s.
I will say that the boob window is not a significant thing in the comic. It only appears in flashbacks. Throughout most of the comic, Power Girl is wearing a power suit, actually.
Okay, at least 10 people watching. Again, Harrenberg, remembering all these things. Please, if you like this thing and want to see more, please consider hitting the thumbs up. You like this. It really helps me. If you didn't like it, you can click thumbs down. It's okay. We don't mind, but maybe leave a comment, and tell us what's wrong.
Harrenberg, what store do you shop at? My question.
Yeah, HB. Where are you shopping? What, Phantom of the Attic? Is that the big Pittsburgh store, right?
There's a few big ones. There's Pittsburgh Comics, Phantom of the Attic. Ides is the one that goes back to the 1970s. Greg Ides, the first big comics retailer in Pittsburgh. I think he just died last year or something.
Oh, I didn't know. That's one I don't know, man.
Oh, yeah, that place was something.
I pretend I'm a Pittsburgh poser. We've talked about this on the show before because I lived there till I was 1, and then my whole family moved to San Jose. But like, my brothers and my mom was born there, and so like I'm like soaking in Pittsburgh culture.
Yeah. My main store in Pittsburgh was Phantom of the Attic in Oakland. My first signing was there. Jeff Yandoro, who I believe still owns it. I'm not sure if he's still
great store.
Yeah, great store, super supportive. And they really did a terrific job of what I think is like the main mission of a comics retailer these days, which is being the curator, the guy who introduces you to the next thing that you should be interested in or ready for. I remember going to him in like 1982 or 83 saying, I'm really into these Alan Moore, Steve Bissette Swamp Thing comics and Walt Simonson's Thor. What else is like that? I wanted the best I can say was comics that make their own world in the pages. I didn't know how to sum up what these folks were doing. And Jeff looked around and he thought for a minute and he reached over and he handed me a copy of Love and Rockets. And
wow.
And that was exactly the right comic at exactly the right time. And my brain went.
What a pick. What a and so for the people out there, how rare to even have that comic in a comic shop. Yeah. Even at that time, like you were in the right place to be in Oakland. And we talked off screen about a mutual friend, Rory Root, and comics experience in Berkeley. And that was a guy who was the master of the introduction to a comic and to bring you in. I've never known anybody
and that. And from having been in that shop, if Rory could think of that comic, he had it. Because
you better believe he had too many copies of it, whatever it was.
Yeah, I've never been in an American store that was that well stocked in my life. Holy cow!
Did you go to the expanded, larger one that was there towards before it folded?
I don't know because I'd only ever been to one shop, so I don't know which one it was, but. Yeah, it was like the warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was it just kept going and going.
It was the unattainable dream to me, like what he achieved at that store. And what was disheartening but amazing too was you could go to their convention setup at San Diego or WonderCon was better than, I'm going to say, 80% of the comic shops in America in terms of what he had right there to sell you on the floor.
Yeah. I can't imagine just how much physical labor it took just to unload that many log boxes for a convention. I guess that's why he always had that wrist thing on.
Yeah, he wasn't doing the loading. Not at the end, believe me. Good. God bless. But rest in peace, Rory Root. And Steve, thanks a lot for taking the time here to talk. Pleasure. I know you're kind of busy. Oh, wait, we got Heroinberg. One more. The store which supports our comic are Phantom Oakland, New Dimension, Heroes Inc., Geekadrome, and Pittsburgh Comics. Greg I died 2 months ago. Come to Phantom or Three Rivers Comic Con. Do a signing, Steve. Great idea.
I'd love to. I haven't done a signing, and I haven't been in Pittsburgh since like 2003, 2004.
Fantastic. Okay, well, and maybe when you got another thing to promote, maybe later on for all a One-Star Squadron, maybe come back here sometime. We could talk about stuff again.
That'd be wonderful. Dan, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been fantastic. I appreciate it. Hey, maybe if you got some of those writers or some of those people that you think might want to talk here, I would love to make a connection.
I'm happy. You should definitely reach out to Jeff Parker. With whom I did Underground. Jeff he's worked in a bunch of different types of comics. He's fantastic at it, and boy, does he have stories.
Great. Okay, will do. All right, thanks, Steve. I'm gonna run the closing credits. If you've got time to stick around, please do. But if you got to go, I understand.
Will do.
Thanks again.
Sure.
And thank you for sticking around and watching this show and putting up with my experimental stuff today, right? Like, I'm really going a little bit nuts with this virtual 3D thingamabob, right? So I can put myself anywhere in a 3D set, and I can manipulate the image, and I can move it around, and I can rotate it, and I can raise it, I can move it in Z space. Let's go in Z space. Up and down, we can rotate. Oh, and even flip me around backwards. That's what I've been doing. That's what's been making it so hard. I can tilt it, can do whatever. This is all my new thing. I wrote this in JavaScript and a library called 3JS and a few other things. And I'm going to be releasing it probably as an open source thingamabob. I don't know, in the not too distant future. Let me go back to let's go back to the Batcave. So I want to thank you all for sticking around and watching Steve Lieber. Wasn't he great? He's fantastic. Who have we got next week? I don't know. I don't have it planned, but I have so many things, potential shows on the agenda. A lot of guys I've been talking to, like the return of another DC guy, Gene Yang, another Eisner Award winner who's been on the show before. Now, don't think that you have to win an Eisner to be on the show, right? Don't even think you got to be published by a mainstream comics company. Just send me your stuff, right? If you want to see your stuff on the air, make sure that you send me your comics to the $1 Million Mailbox, P.O. Box 1163, Arcata, California, 95518. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to play the closing credits, and we'll have a little cameo at the end of the credits like we normally do. Don't worry. It might be one you've seen before, but if maybe it's new to you. Anyway, thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.
So I say, it's not Frankenstein, you moron. It's Frankenstein's monster.
Oh, by Cromlin, you sure showed him.